exactly. But that's the thing. It's like, but it can't be fascism if it doesn't come from that part of Germany, right? Or that, it's a bit like the joke about
Otherwise
like wine
just
and whatever.
Sparkling authoritarianism.
Exactly, right. Sparkling, exactly.
Liberal Currents presents Half the Answer with your hosts, Caitlin M. Green and Trent R. Nelson.
Well, happy days are here again. And that's a fact.
You're calling it.
We're calling it. It's been a few down weeks, but you know what? You take a break, take a breather, and you know that understanding a question is half of an answer. And this is, of course, half the answer with your host, Trent R. Nelson, but only your co-host, because we also have the marvelous Caitlin M. Green. And you know what we both get up to. I'm a writer, editor, historian. I love philosopher, there you go, lover of wisdom. And we have Caitlin, and she is a linguist, she's a writer, she's an editor, she is a part of that shared genius that is human existence. And she's a mom too. Caitlin, how are you today? And what a wonderful day it is indeed to chat with wonderful folks. Who are we doing that with today, and what are we talking about?
Well, I have to warn you, Trent. I'm on day 4 of antibiotics, and I am on fire. I am ready. I'm going to be so unbearable today. I hope you're ready. I hope you're excited.
We've been missing you.
Yeah, I'm so back, baby. And I actually had delayed bringing this guest on because I wanted to be more or less alive when we got to have him on. So I'm so excited to welcome Aurelien Mondon, a professor of politics, languages, and international studies, whose research focuses on the mainstreaming of far-right and reactionary discourse and politics. Now, you may reasonably expect that I am excited about this topic just in my life. And so we've even cited a paper of his before when we talked about Islamophobia in liberal discourse. And I'm so excited to have you on, Aurelien. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you. I'm really, really excited to be here, and I'm really glad to hear that you're feeling better as well. So yeah, looking forward to this.
It's been a rough couple of months.
It's been an ongoing thing, yes.
Right. So I invited you on specifically today because of your recent paper with Juan Roch and Daniel Balinas, which was in Contemporary Political Theory, called A Critique of the Polarization Narrative, Expanding the Limits of Democracy, Parties, and Political Participation. And that's because it just tickled a spot in my brain where I was like, oh, thank goodness, like this needs to happen. Because polarization is a huge buzzword in sort of political media. Also, you pointed out in the paper, like political science research as well. Like you saw this big uptick in usage of the term, right? So I really want to thank you for being here. Since I'm back in my full form, I want to open with a screed, if that's okay. Okay, let's go for my screed.
Let's go. It's been a minute. Let's go. Let's screed.
I haven't screeded in so long. Hey, everyone. I am here with an extremely serious message that is for the grown-ups in the room. Please don't say abolish ICE. Okay, let's listen to the experts like Blas Núñez Neto from the Searchlight Institute. It's probably not important that he also works for a corporate consulting firm that has contracts with major government contractors in the defense and surveillance industry who are expecting to rake in heaps of cash as the immigration enforcement budget skyrockets. That would be falling for the guilt by association fallacy, after all. And grown-ups don't do that, okay? Abolish is too strong. After all, if we react to Trump's lawless use of ICE by demanding to throw the whole thing out, that super grown-up memo says we will create a lawless system where people who enter the country illegally can stay here indefinitely, leaving no agency charged with finding and removing them. Did you even think of that? I bet not. And please do not say false dichotomy to me right now. Okay, we are being adults. Abolishing ICE is rash and extreme. Instead, let's reform and retrain. It's like the editorial board at the Washington Post said. Maybe you were feeling excited about Abigail Spanberger blocking local law enforcement's cooperation with ICE in Virginia. Well, how short-sighted can you be? You are asking for a backlash. I will quote, without state and local cooperation, ICE gets a strong justification to deploy force in pursuit of the violent criminals that the overwhelmingly majority of Americans don't want on the streets. And yeah, it does say overwhelmingly and not overwhelming. I'm not sure why. It's the WAPO editorial board. Okay, we're not going to question their grammar. It's actually much safer to have Customs and Border Protection in charge. The grown-ups at WAPO know that America has swung between extremes on immigration. What is the left extreme that we have swung to? Please don't ask me that. In fact, don't ask me any more questions. No, we won't commit to abolish ICE. Okay, let's calmly and deliberately set out a short list of common sense reforms that everybody can agree on. Like not deporting U.S. citizens, using body cams, having their faces clearly visible so that their victims can pursue justice if they survive the encounter. Oh, hold on. What's that? I'm getting something. Senator Schumer is speaking. He says no masks except in extraordinary and unusual circumstances. Hakeem Jeffries, you had something to say? Oh, it's that the problem isn't masks per se, but masks being deployed in an arbitrary and capricious fashion. And thank goodness Chris Murphy is reminding us that actually common sense dictates that there are sometimes safety reasons why you may need a mask. So, no masks unless the militarized terror squad guys really want to. That's very grown up and moderate of you. Are you mad about this? Well, you shouldn't be. Anger is a child's emotion. And anyway, it's fine because a Democratic aide has assured us that they are just making sure the legislative text is consistent with general best practices for law enforcement. Representative DeLauro says that the Dems are speaking to law enforcement experts about what exceptions they should make. So it's all very above board, very rational, very expert, very demure. Yes, I know that Customs and Border Protection isn't the same kind of law enforcement as police. I know that you cannot actually dox a public servant, but we have to make compromises in order to be reasonable. Don't be divisive. And while we're on the subject, you have got to turn down the rhetoric when it comes to ICE and Customs and Border Protection. Like House Majority Leader Scalise said, if you call the heavily armed and volatile group of violent murderers names like Gestapo or accuse them of hurting people in a city where they shot 3 nonviolent observers in a month and kidnapped a bunch of elementary school kids to an unsafe and unsanitary facility in Texas, then you are actually the one who is causing violence. Scalise could not have been clearer. We have to be careful and measured about how we talk about people. This was in the same interview where he accused the leaders of Minneapolis of letting their city burn down in 2020. Why do you ask? You know, that's the real problem with society today. We're so polarized. There's no nuance anywhere. College students demand to be coddled and protected from ever learning anything that makes them uncomfortable. Celebrities get canceled for little stuff like abusing their castmates or performing at the pleasure of the royal family of Saudi Arabia. Lefty kids won't go to Thanksgiving at their MAGA grandparents' house. Conservative men can't find women to date them because of a trifling little thing like they don't believe we should have rights. They're so rigid, so dogmatic. We've got to get out of this polarized way of being. Right, Aurelien?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have nothing else to say. I think you've summarized it very well.
Podcast is over.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, look, absolutely. And I think, what you've done is really show how ridiculous what is portrayed as grown up, as sensible, as serious analysis really is. And I think it really is a show like a clear symptom of the state of our democracies are in at the moment, and not just in the United States, right? I mean, our paper was not just about the United States; it was about the UK, right. About Spain, France. Yeah, I think we are at this kind of critical juncture, and I think what we're seeing is a mainstream elite that is completely failing us, in actually having the right diagnosis.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot, Trent, you and me, about how empathy has become so demonized, and that if you have a feeling that there's a population of people that's endangered or needs to be taken care of, that you're acting like a child somehow, or that you're not being rational. And you really, I think, cut to the quick of it in this paper, where it's like, that is truly just a way to cut off conversation, maintain the status quo, keep the elites in the position that they're in, right?
And absolutely. And I think it's something that most people notice as well. I mean, it was quite interesting because I personally started really thinking about this term polarization a couple of years ago when I co-authored a short article for Jacobin, I think it was at the time, with Evan Smith, where we kept hearing the term polarization during the Biden era, and it kept annoying us because we were like, hold on, there is polarization, but who's doing it, right? And should we really reconcile with people who want some communities having their rights removed or even worse, right? And so that kind of upset us. So we wrote that short article. And at the same time, my two co-authors in this paper that you talked about earlier, Juan and Danielle, were also working separately on polarization. And so, about a year ago, the three of us were just chatting and we're like, oh, maybe we should write something together. And we did. And as we wrote about it, as we presented it, a lot of people had the same kind of itch in a way, but they needed scratched, which is I keep hearing polarization and it's not making any sense in the context we live in, right? It's not actually helping us understand the context we live in. And it's really hindering our possibilities of changing things and of expressing our anger, our despair, our, the way we feel about the state of things. And so, we were quite happy with the way the article came up. In the end, I think we could have worked on it more. I think we could have sharpened it, but I think we felt a sense of urgency to put it out there as well. So it's kind of nice to see it received well so far.
Yeah. And it feels like it's opening a door to a lot more work that you can
Absolutely.
do coming up. So I think that's great. Yeah, I think this is something that also connects to work that I've been doing on anti-wokeness, right? Mm-hmm. Where you've noticed that polarization narratives have the same kind of metaphors associated with them, where they're like, oh, you're infected. It's a disease. It is it has this viral aspect to it of it's a disease that's eating away. And, we've got the woke mind virus. We've got all of these sort of rationalist guys who are wokeness is eating away and it's making you sick, right?
Well, look at how they've spoken about gay people forever, right? That is also an illness. That is also something that you can contract, that don't hang around gay people, don't listen to gay stuff, you might get gay. So it's all the same type of idea that...
Well, and trans now, the trans social contagion idea, right? That if you watch one too many YouTube videos, suddenly... you're going to want to transition. It's that's truly not how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. But this pathologization of kind of politics has always been really core to kind of reactionary and fascist politics, right? You could think about the same thing about anti-Semitism, for example, which is based on kind of similar ideas as well. So, this is age old and we keep falling for the same things and we keep using the same terms, this kind of contagion effect, this kind of sickness, disease, all of that. And it's just so unhelpful.
Well, my question to both of you is sort of how much of this polarization discussion, how much can we look at the fact that it seems as though in the mainstream we are, and Caitlin and I have spoken about this before, we're always sort of playing into what the right wing is saying. We're validating their beliefs by playing on their rules. So we're always like Caitlin was saying in her script, right? Maybe that's a little bit too much because the right says it's a little bit too much. We don't stand up like they stand up and say, actually, all people deserve our love and respect and care, right? We're always, maybe they're right. Maybe some people, maybe we have to be careful. Maybe it's more important to care about the masked thugs than it is to care about the kindergartners.
Well, it's so one-sided, right? So that WAPO editorial that came out, I think this morning or yesterday or something, was it is in there being if we go too extreme with stopping cooperation between local police and the CBP, then we're going to experience a really bad backlash, and the officers are going to have to be tackling people 8 guys to a person on the street instead of simply transferring them peaceably from the jailhouse. It's very, very dangerous. You have to think about not being so extreme. And then in the same paragraph is and also, we really need to be dealing with this immigration crisis. And in fact, basically anything is acceptable because one murder is too many. And it's like, well, that's an extreme statement to say that you can do anything in order to rid the city of one single murderer. That's, like not even seeing the extremism in their own speech because they're so laser focused on it's the progressives who are extreme.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think what really kind of like is maddening in the current situation is that, I couldn't understand it during the Biden era. The fact that there was all this talk from the Democrats about like, oh, we need to kind of reconcile, we need to kind of like, appease the society, we need to come back together, we need to start talking, we need to dine across the divide, all of these kind of like really unhelpful metaphors. We can come back to this one later. But, I just found it upsetting back then because I think it was deeply, deeply insulting to all the communities that had been at the sharp end of Trumpism in the first time around, right? And also like, we saw on January the 6th that these people were not about reconciliation. These people were not ready to kind of actually accept that some people deserve rights, whether it's whether it's trans community, whether it's immigrants, legal or not, whatever, right? Racialized minorities and so on and so forth, people who are on the welfare state, on welfare and so on. But what I don't really get anymore at all is how this can still work in the second kind of Trump presidency when we've seen Trump being much better prepared this time around, going full throttle from day one, breaking everything, breaking every rule, not playing by the book, not playing by the rules.
Yeah.
And yet we still see people being like, oh, maybe we should be careful. Maybe we should be nice to these people. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, the Atlantic is calling it fascism. If the Atlantic is calling it fascism, I think we can all call it fascism, right? By this stage.
But this is an American tradition, Aurelien. This is this is in the 18th century, right? Mm-hmm. Well, we need the southern states, and so I guess slavery would be okay. And then we have a civil war, and we're all like, yeah, but we have to make sure that the South feels a part of it, and maybe let's not be as tough as we should be, right? And it just continues on. I mean, bringing over Nazis after the Second World War. Yeah. We love to stretch out the arm, to outreach, to say, well, but as you noted, and I think it's really time. It's long past time to be fair. It's long past time that we say, as you noted, a lot of these folks are interested in reconciliation. Yeah. And if they are interested in reconciliation, then we have to be strong. And we have to say, you can come reconcile to our civilization. Mm-hmm. You can come reconcile to our love and kindness and mutuality.
Show me that you can exist normally alongside trans people.
We don't have
Venezuelan people and Somali people.
Right. we don't have to do that with George Lincoln Rockwell, right? Like it's not. We're not the ones obligated, and why we feel that way. I mean, I suspect that there is this sense of honor that a lot of these people feel when they say, well, I will be the bigger person. I will stretch out my hand. I will try
But it's not them being the bigger person. It's them telling us that we have to somehow. And it's like, how many times do I have to reach my hand out to get slapped in the face? And I'm expected to do it again, and it's similar, I think.
It's not the people at the sharp end. Right, it's not the people at the sharp end of this politics who are not at the sharp end it's the people at the sharp end who are like have to be the bigger person. It's like the people who are suffering day in day out from reactionary politics and their mainstreaming, whether it's through Trump and the Republicans or the Democrats before them or the Republicans before Trump. And these people are always asked to kind of do more, to give away more, to kind of like, it's okay, you're losing some rights, but it could be worse. And it's like this kind of race to the bottom, which I think is absolutely insane, right? And I think the right has been very clever at hijacking kind of liberal discourses to kind of completely disarm the kind of liberal mainstream, through free speech, for example, like through cancel culture, all of that stuff. That is there's such bad faith arguments. Like if you scratch the surface, you see that it is just completely opportunistic, and yet
actually,
but they know that. They know how to take advantage of us because they know that we will ultimately fall onto our principles. Whereas they can play that against us, knowing that in a situation where they have power, they would never abide by our principles. So they have us in a situation where we won't break our principles to push back against them, and they know that they can fool us, even though we're not fooled. We know that this will happen, but
also like the people who are supposed to represent us in the like sort of thinky talky jobs, like being on TV and writing, your editorials or whatever. Those people are not the same people that they're talking about, right? They're not the left. They're not the woke, right? Those people don't get to work for the Washington Post editorial board. Not that really anybody gets to work for them anymore, I guess.
Yeah. No, it's true. Exactly. After yesterday, but no, that's absolutely true. But I think there's something there as well about how these people have convinced us that kind of like from, and this is something we look at in the article as well, this kind of longer trend since the kind of like 80s, 90s of like, the end of history, which of course was debunked very quickly, but still kind of grips us and grips our mainstream elite in many ways, right? Lots of people are like, well, politics doesn't exist. It's about management. It's about management of the economy, management of inflation, all of this kind of stuff. Politics should be done by technocrats, by people who know what they're doing, and then the people can consume, right? And they can focus on their kind of individual kind of like desires and demands, and that's it. That's where politics should take place. And I think a lot of us have internalized it. Even us on the left, people who feel that something is wrong, we've somewhat internalized it to the point where we don't have like almost red lines. We need these red lines, these moments where we say no. We're like, no, that's it. This is not debatable. The rights of trans people is not debatable. The rights of racialized minorities is not debatable. Systemic racism is a reality that needs to be destroyed. And then we need to draw the logical conclusion on that. And what we're arguing in a way is that this depoliticization that takes place through concepts such as polarization, for example, which tells us, well, we need to meet in the middle of these two extremes. This is deeply problematic for democracy because this is making us lose sight of the fact that any progress that we've made in any society, whether it's the US, European countries, any other countries, has been through deeply polarized struggles. Right. I mean, you talked about the Civil War before. Well, it was a very polarized struggle, that led to the abolition of slavery. I agree. It didn't work out very well. Very quickly, there was segregation. But, the North and South didn't sit at the table from the start and just, decided to abolish slavery kindly. Women didn't get the right to vote anywhere through a very nice little debate amongst men who decided, women are here, maybe we should give them the right to vote, right? And so on and so forth. Like, workers' rights, the fact that we have, a welfare state or social security, all of these kind of things, they were very deeply polarizing struggles where the elite, which had a lot of power, both symbolic, financial, and political, was pitted against the people, communities who were fighting for their rights. And sometimes, or quite often, more often than not, people died fighting for these rights. If that's not polarization, I don't know what it is. But if that's not also positive progress and politics, I don't know what it is either.
Now, Aurelien, you're bringing up people who stood up and said, we're not going to give anymore. Okay, we're done giving. We've given enough. It's time that you give us a little something. And of course, in one circumstance, we had a whole civil war about it. But we brought up earlier how these different factions, different groups, we're all giving. We're all trying to give, all trying to be more reasonable, right? The folks at the sharp end. That's also an American tradition, though. That's also an American tradition. That's happened. Black people, gay people, immigrants, Spanish people, all sorts of individuals. How do we push back? How do we change that sort of narrative, that sort of form, and say, you know what, now is the time that we really mean what we say. And we're not going to compromise here. You're going to have to compromise. You're going to have to come over.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a great question, and that's a huge one, right? And if I wrote that paper, I think, I would be invited again probably on this podcast. But it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, and that many colleagues have been thinking a lot about, and many thinkers and many activists on the ground have been thinking about as well. And I think, it's not just an American tradition. I think it's broadly a Western tradition as well, but it's also a tradition that is kind of like that happens in any kind of society that is where power is distributed unevenly, where you have like a privileged elite that somehow has a lot of power, whether again political, financial, symbolic, discursive, and so on. So this is not American in and of itself. And I think what we need to do really is reclaim the power that we have and reclaim our faith in democracy, because what we live in today, whether it's in the US, in Europe, or in many other countries, even though in 2024 we celebrated the year of democracy where more people than ever went to the ballot box, very few of these elections were actually democratic. And I'm not talking about elections where the ballot box is kind of like tampered with or anything like that. I'm talking about elections where you have a real political discussion. Right. We live in societies where even though you might not have corrupt elections and corrupt electoral systems, the fact that you cannot have alternatives to the status quo except for the far right and fascism is not a democratic society in my book. The fact that you can't have a discussion about the way the economic system is set up and the way wealth is distributed, that's not a democracy in my book. So I think what we need to do is reclaim democracy. We need to reclaim our faith in democracy, and we need to reclaim our power. And to reclaim our power, what we need to do is to have faith in community and in community organizing, and in which means that actually we need to kind of like bypass these arguments around the fear of the masses, which are very old arguments, since the kind of like period of the revolutions, in the 18th century, French Revolution and so on. There's been theorists on the reactionary right who have been trying to kind of like amp up the fear of the masses, the fear of the crowds. How when individuals are on their own, they act rationally, but when people are together, they just act emotionally, which of course is a deeply misogynistic argument as well, right? Which is about patriarchy, right? But the crowd is women, and the individual is man, and all of this we need to kind of go against, because this is something that we're seeing still to this day, the fear of trade unions, the fear of mass political parties, the fear of populism, for example, which of course equates both the left and the far right, even though the far right, I would argue, is not populist, is something else, is nationalist, racist, white supremacist, transphobic, misogynistic, and so on. So I think we need to recreate this faith in the people. And that's what we're seeing on the streets of Minneapolis, for example. That's what we're seeing, these people standing together and reclaiming this power, people finding that they have power at a huge cost, right? And it takes an insane amount of bravery. But people can change the course of history like that, right? And this is the only way that the course of history has been changed in the past. And if it's polarization, then bring on polarization, right?
Well, I've noticed a use of the word polarization in a positive way when Minneapolis residents talk about, in the Twin Cities, when they talk about what they are experiencing, where they'll be like, I saw with my own eyes what the immigration apparatus of this country actually does, and I have become polarized, or they'll say negatively polarized, where they're like, I can see what our government has been up to when it comes to immigration, and I want no part of it. And in fact, I'm going to dedicate hours of my day to standing outside in the freezing cold, possibly getting shot or run over, because I hate that so much, right? And so it's there you go. There's healthy polarization, because when you see something awful, saying that's awful is not actually an example of irrationality. Right? It's not you falling for something. It's you understanding how the world is and saying, I'd like it to be different. And we've talked about this too, where partisanship, again, we kind of need to embrace partisanship a little bit, where we're looking at an entire party whose whole attitude is, I'll never give you a single thing you want ever, right? And so to say, I'm going to reach across the aisle to that is kind of goofy. It's a little silly. And to say we need to work within ourselves to figure out how to fight them, that's partisanship, but it's also kind of what needs to happen if we're going to start to fix things a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things as well that kind of is linked to what you're talking about here is also the need to kind of overcome this idea, this very kind of spatial idea that we have of politics, which is a spectrum, right? Politics is not a spectrum, because if we understand politics as a spectrum, and therefore as two poles, two extreme poles that are fighting each other, then we make the assumption that there's something in the middle that is somewhat in the middle of these two ideas. So it's and that's the kind of warm center where we can all gather around. And unfortunately, this idea of politics as a spectrum has led us to believe that the kind of liberal centrist center is where we should meet. That's where reasonable kind of argument is. That's where sensible politics is, and that's where we should be. So we shouldn't demand too much here, just like we shouldn't demand too much on this side as well. And this is deeply problematic. I'm not saying that the left and right are irrelevant. I think they are, but I think it's much more complicated than a spectrum where there's a middle. In fact, what I would say is there's no such thing as centrism, right? And many people in the US have started talking about reactionary centrism or even extreme centrism, where this kind of centrist positioning is not moderate by any stretch of the imagination, but deeply welded to completely irrational, deeply political and ideological tenets, whether it's neoliberalism, capitalism, white supremacy to some extent.
It's hardly even real. I mean, if you look at where people actually fall on, in political lookouts, it's no one is actually in the middle. No one is ever in the middle. They're everywhere.
Yeah, but
if you think about like these guys on the left think this, these guys on the right think this, and I'm going to find the correct position by looking in the middle without ever consulting like research or thinking it through yourself or anything like looking at the real world at all, then it's pretty obvious that that's a mistake.
But also political values, right? Like, do we really want to be in the middle of racism and anti-racism? Do we want to be in the middle of fascism and anti-fascism? I don't think so.
Racism.
A little amount of fascism is fine, right? Like, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous way to look at politics. And yet that's the one we're told to engage with, which is just such a bad premise.
It's very Aristotelian, is it not? Like we find the golden mean between the two, and this is sort of the continuation of that idea that we can find some type of, as you noted, warmth in the middle. But it's simply not true. Why would we want to compromise with racism? Why would we want to compromise with fascism?
Exactly.
Okay.
I think again,
I really want to talk about dining across the divide because your paper linked to it, and then I read some of them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Die.
I feel bad.
I
It's horrible.
desired the cold embrace of death. So this is a series in The Guardian called Dining Across the Divide, where they're like, we're going to take two normal people who disagree on politics, and we're going to like put them in a restaurant, and we're going to take some really beautifully lit photos of their meal and also describe what they ate, because that's really important. And then they're going to be like, I think we should lock more people up. I think we should lock fewer people up. This salad is delicious. Well, at least we can agree on one thing.
It's one of these series that is just incredibly addictive for all the wrong reasons, right? Like, it's just like, I know when I read it that I die inside a little bit every time, but I just can't help it. It's like, it's just,
Yeah. No, that's right. It's like reality TV. They're just like, I shouldn't be here.
with horrible politics added to that as well. But again, what I find fascinating is how this is seen as something clever, as something, it's in a newspaper that is broadly kind of center left, that is broadly against the far right, but does a lot of, there's some very good kind of investigative journalism that's done by The Guardian. But then there are things like this that kind of completely muddy the waters in a way, but tell us like, well, actually, we've been showing you how dangerous racism is, how dangerous fascism is, how it's rising in these different ways. But actually, we can all have fun together. That's all good. And it's like, it's just so problematic. I think, again, it comes back to drawing the lines in a way. And like, the far right loves to pretend, and you said that, in your introduction, Caitlin, about like how we our students are just too woke, and they just like, they don't want to feel uncomfortable. They don't want to debate. They don't want to do these things, and what the far right loves to debate, apparently we're told,
allegedly,
and so on, allegedly, right? But this is all bullshit, of course, right? And I'm using bullshit in the academic sense of the term, of course.
That's right.
But because on the left, we debate all the time, For example, you can debate about what to do about the climate crisis, and there's lots of different kind of arguments by scientists that are saying we should do this, and blah, blah, blah. That's a very interesting debate. Same thing about, what should we do with ICE? How should we abolish it? Where should we put the money? How should we make sure that people are safe? Same thing with the violence against women and girls. What do we do against patriarchy? All of that stuff. There's lots of debates. There's lots of very uncomfortable moments about this. These are real debates. Debating whether trans people should have rights or not is not a debate. This is where we need to draw the line, right? We should all agree that trans people should have rights, that racism is a bad thing, that fascism is a bad thing. And then let's have debates about how to abolish that and have a just, fair, democratic society. I'm not interested in a debate between fascism good, fascism bad. no, like that line I've drawn a long time ago. I think,
Yeah,
and that's the problem we have with dining across the divide, because it makes us feel like, oh, maybe fascists have a point, or maybe we should be able to shake hands at the end. It's like, no, I don't. No, we shouldn't.
Because they don't want to shake hands with me anyway.
No,
so why should I bother?
Right.
I think one of the worst parts of it is something that I harp on a lot. You can look back in the 1930s and you can look at the pictures of like all the Nazi officers out at like picnic, with their wives, with their kids. And, when bad people pass away, when they die, when something happens to them, the society has this impulse to treat them as they are like good people in the society.
Yeah.
And that, when I first recognized that, it made me think like we really imagine bad people, right, to have like horns, to have horns and tails and hooves and
Can't
be very
just see them and know, yeah.
Right. And so I feel like this dining across the divide business is it's more like washing people, washing these ideas into, as you noted, Aurelien, this is fine. We can have breadsticks and talk, and it's not a big deal. And we're not really recognizing, as you noted, what is and what is not debatable. And we're also not recognizing the fact that people who are bad faith, people who wish for democracy to die, wish for trans people to suffer, they look and sound oftentimes just like we look and sound. They don't have hooves. They don't have horns. They are just regular people with families, with kids who love them, with grandparents who care for them. I mean, you'd be forgiven, in a moment of weakness from forgetting that these are bad people, because they look and sound just like the rest of us.
But you're absolutely right. And this is, I've done quite a lot of work on that, on the exceptionalization of the far right, which then prevents us from actually seeing how far right politics is also has roots in the mainstream, for example. And this exceptionalization in particular of fascism and Nazism, something that Robert Meister has called, like in a book where he talks about after evil, this idea that, fascism, Nazism was evil, we defeated them, and then we're fine. Then we have human rights and it's beautiful and it's never going to come back again. Well, obviously it came back, because the roots were never really addressed, because the roots of fascism, Nazism, anti-Semitism, racism, eugenics were very much mainstream. So, like the Second World War, in a way, had allowed colonial powers in particular to whitewash themselves, to kind of clean themselves from all the things that they had participated in building that led to fascism and to Nazism. And so I think, you're absolutely right about this exceptionalization. And as we've kind of like moved away from the Second World War, where evil kind of like became increasingly caricatured as like, jackboots, people with horns, people with swastikas, all of that kind of stuff, then if a kind of fascist turned up dressed differently, well, we would almost welcome them. I don't know if you remember in 2016, and to me that stayed with me the entire time. I think it was in 2016, if I'm correct, or 2015, Mother Jones covered Richard Spencer and called him a dapper white nationalist.
Yeah.
I was like, Richard bloody Spencer, a dapper white nationalist. Like, how euphemistic is that, right? I mean, it's absolutely insane.
Well, yeah.
Just like calling Trump a populist, or just like calling, Elon Musk just an entrepreneur. It's like, is this all they are?
Well,
is this the biggest
even just
issue?
taking Bovino out of Minneapolis and putting Homan in, right? It's like, okay, Bovino was a caricature, right? He was actually like a jackbooted, he had his special bomber jacket, like his long jacket and his stupid haircut, right? And he was walking around acting like a bully, looking like a Nazi, and like that was easy, right? But then when Trump is like, well, I'm sending him back to El Centro and I'm putting Homan in, people are like, Trump is moderating. And it's like, Homan is as bad, and he is doing things that are as bad in the Twin Cities. But it's like Trump breathes and people are like, oh, so presidential. He's moderating. How delightful.
But you see, what's fascinating in all of this is that we can see long trends on the far and extreme right to kind of hijack this kind of like narratives in a way. Back in the 1970s, when the far right was at an idea when no one really kind of voted for the far right anymore, because there was still kind of a stench of Nazism, fascism, the horrors of the Holocaust became clearer and clearer. There was also all the big movements in the late 1960s, for like kind of young people, civil rights movement in the United States, but also like May 68 in France and in various other places. So there was this kind of progressive wave. And so the far right really kind of disappeared from the electoral arena at least. And some intellectuals on the far right decided to kind of like, pull the plug and say, okay, we're going to stop. We're going to stop with electoral politics. We're going to stop with trying to get into power, because before we get into power, we need to kind of format our ideas, change our ideas, recalibrate, make them acceptable, because we can't just go out anymore and be dressed as Nazis or talk about biological racism, talk about like these kind of things, because that just doesn't fly anymore. The pendulum has swung. And so these people ended up borrowing from Antonio Gramsci, who was a communist theorist who, was kind of like famous for kind of coming up with a concept of, or developing at least the concept of hegemony, And so these people bastardized Gramsci, and they decided that before gaining political power, they needed to gain cultural power. And so they did that by reshaping their discourse, their vocabulary. So instead of talking about biological racism and how the white race is superior to the other races, they would talk about culture. And they would say, well, we're all different cultures, right? The French culture is beautiful. The Bangladeshi culture is beautiful. The Filipino culture is beautiful. The Mexican culture is beautiful. They're all beautiful. I love cultures. We're all equal, but we need to protect cultures, So we should keep people separate, as if French people were a homogeneous culture, right? Or as if British people or American people. This is ridiculous. So it was exactly the same racializing argument, which is like, well, if you're French, you're X, Y, and Z, right?
Right.
And you can never become X, Y, and Z if you're not French, which is ridiculous. But that was swallowed up within kind of liberal discourse because it sounded great. It sounded like multiculturalism almost.
Well, and just like how eugenics got rebranded to human biodiversity, and
exactly right,
the study of group differences, and we're just studying. It's so rude of you actually to suggest that what we're doing is somehow like morally or factually wrong. I was just laughing because
again, Caitlin.
Oh no! I keep doing it. Oh man. Okay. Well, I'm going to read you a tweet and that's going to make you mad. So let's get polarized. So I was just laughing because I was looking around just for examples and things. And I went over to Richard Hanania's Twitter because I like to suffer. And I always laugh because like he's always been such an obvious like creep and weirdo and fascist anyway, but he's doing this whole thing where he's not happy about the immigration policies, so now he's allowed back, I guess. But like the fact that his think tank, which he was using to just like get grants and do basically nothing, was called the Center for the Study of Partisanship, and I was like, this is the most partisan man I've ever seen in my life. Anyway, he was reacting to something that Charles Murray wrote about who cares, right? Charles Murray, but a eugenicist, who was like, they're talking about the Asian immigration and how like Asians are doing too well in America, and it's like taking opportunities away from white people because they're like working harder and they're smarter and their genetics are better or whatever. And Helen Andrews thinks that's bad because like now Mackenzie Lee can't get into an Ivy League school. But Charles Murray is like, actually, it's really great that we're importing like high quality immigrants, right? So Richard Hanania is like responding to this going, it's been fascinating to observe the difference between those into the group differences for the science and those in it for the white nationalism, as if those are different, being like, well, Charles Murray likes that the genetically superior Asians are coming to America to benefit us because he's like a good scientist, whereas Helen Andrews is mad about it because she wants white people to do better. It's like, dude, both of those are predicated on your bizarre eugenicist views.
Right. Yeah, again, like weird debates, right? Is it the kind of debate we want to have? Is it the kind of discussion? And what does that do as well? This idea that it tells us that it's two different opposed points almost, and that one of them is correct. And it's like, no, we have, as you said, both of them should be discarded. But I think it's again one of the things that I always kind of talk about particularly when I talk to students about these kind of things, about kind of trying to understand the kind of reactionary moment we're in, is trying also always look at power. Who has the power to shape these narratives? Why is it just these two narratives that are being heard? Where's the money coming from? As you said, getting a bunch of grants, like the money and all of that, and even thinking about science. Science is political. It's always political, even if it's kind of like scientific scientifically proven. It's like, where does the funding go? What do we fund in terms of science? Where is it done? By who? All of these kind of things. And it can be positive and it can be negative, but politics is there, and power is there in what we're doing. And I think we far too often ignore power and pretend that actually we have a level playing field, which we don't have, we definitely don't have. And that's where, again, polarization is very problematic, because it assumes this level playing field where the left and the extreme right are arguing at each other from the same kind of like position, right, of power. But the extreme right has tons of money, tons of media, from the mainstream media to the far right media, from social media to legacy media. And the left has what? We have ourselves, we have each other, but that's pretty much it. We have, a few podcasts, right? Yeah, right.
Well,
Literally.
The Epstein thing has really laid bare one of the major problems with how blinkered we've been, which is like basically everybody who's ever funded research in the U.S. is in those files. And it's like, that's bad in and of itself, right? But it also points out, it like makes very obvious the issue that in the United States, all of our expensive research gets done because a number of charitable billionaires think that it's worth funding, as opposed to it being a publicly funded pursuit, right? Like if we had public science in the way that we ought to, we wouldn't need, Bill Gates, who tried to dose his wife up with anti-chlamydia medicine instead of telling her that he'd been sleeping around or whatever. Like, we don't need that guy. Why do we need that guy? We should just have the money to do research.
But I mean, again, like, right, that brings us back also to the kind of like incredible and very convenient, and I would say very conscious naivety of like the, 10, 15 years ago, when we used to think of some billionaires as good people. I mean, remember when Zuckerberg was pitted against Musk, and, one was the progressive one and the other one was the kind of like reactionary one. And it's like, oh, surprise, surprise, they were both behind Trump in the end. It's like, who could have guessed? I mean, I had no idea that billionaires had problematic politics. But it's like, again,
I think this is the first time that it's happened, so you'd be forgiven.
No, that's true. I mean, hashtag not all billionaires, right? But
please.
It's just mind-blowing, the kind of like the pills we swallowed, like to kind of take almost kind of reactionary politics kind of narratives, and just kind of like completely kind of like close our eyes on things that were so obvious. But I think you're right about the Epstein files. I think what's been fascinating about it is people waking up to the fact that, it's going back to what you were saying, Trent, about having evil people. And Epstein was the perfect evil almost. But then what you realize is that actually around him, there's all kinds of elites, Democrats, Republicans, people in the Labour Party in the UK, there's anyone who wanted to be close to power, regardless of their politics, ended up together in the same party. Noam Chomsky, right? Like, I mean, it's insane. Again, but that says something about academics who love to kind of create kind of idols. Even though we pretend that we're just about knowledge and we're about kind of democratic advancement and all of that, we love our idols. We love to kind of put people on pedestals. And this is what happens when you do.
Well, we have people.
If you check my chapter in the book, Inclusion in Linguistics, about abolishing the lone genius idea.
Yeah.
Good. I will check it out then. Yeah, absolutely.
It is open access. So I
thought you were about to tell me that you cited Chomsky a lot in there. I'm like, oh god.
We talked about that. It was me and Ricker, and we talked about that a lot. We're like, we're going to talk about him, but can we get around like actually giving him citations?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? But yeah.
In the same way that we have in our minds what evil looks like, what a bad person looks like, what a fascist looks like, what a racist looks like, we have in our minds what fascism looks like. Mm-hmm. We have in our minds what racism looks like, not just what the individuals look like, but what it looks like. And that has also fooled us in many circumstances, because
it could never look like your friend. Come on.
It
could
nice
never,
friend Jeff. As Aurelien noted, it could never look like it did in the 1930s. Okay, because first of all, the gig is up, and second of all, right, like
Well,
ideologies are born of the culture that they devise from, right? So a democracy is going to be different in every nation, every state, every place, because of course it is an amalgamation of the people of that area. And so when we tell somebody that there are Nazis in the White House, whether it's 2017 or 2025, right? They're like, "What do you mean? That guy looks like that just seems just like America."
I would simply direct them to go on to x.com and visit the Department of Homeland Security account, because that's the one place where the Nazis look like Nazis.
But you go to France and you see what the former National Front, right, and Marine Le Pen and formerly Jean-Marie Le Pen, right, and like these things come out of a completely different beginning, right? They come out of a lot of like Algeria and that whole struggle and the decolonialization of France. And so, of course, like they're going to be different, and we have to be able to identify the base points within all of them. That's the only way we're going to be able to understand what we're dealing with, is to really look down and find the distilled points that they all share.
What are you referencing, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think, we looking for this ideal type, or waiting for this ideal type to come back to be like, oh, this is fascism, finally, was a complete mistake, right? Because we've seen trends, we've seen things coming back up. Of course, they were different, as you said, because it's a question of where it's happening, when it's happening, the context, the economic context as well, whether there's a crisis or not, all of that stuff, right? That is going to impact, just like Italian fascism was different from German Nazism, right? And from other forms of fascism that have taken place. And yet we've been fooled into believing that it would come back exactly the same way. And this has been so problematic until recently. And now it's like, oh yeah, actually it is exactly the same. I mean, you were talking about Bovino before. It's quite insane how similar it is to what was happening in the 1930s. But I always show my students as well, when I try to kind of make exactly that point, Trent, that you just made, is I show them a quote from a French neo-fascist in the 1960s, Maurice Bardèche, who has this quote that is amazing. He says, look, when fascism comes back, it's not going to look like fascism during the 1930s and 40s. It's going to look completely different. It's going to be in the form of a child with a different face that no one is going to see coming, but will be back, right? And it's like, we were warned. They told us. Yeah. And it's
they said, we'll be back.
Huey Long said the same thing about America, right? We'll have fascism. It'll be Americanism.
Exactly, but that's the thing. It's like, but it can't be American, because it can't be fascism if it doesn't come from that part of Germany, right? Or that it's a bit like the joke about like wine and whatever.
Sparkling authoritarianism.
Exactly, right. Sparkling, exactly. But I'm glad you saw where I was going with that, because I lost the track. I lost my track there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think I've been doing this. I've been an academic for like almost 20 years now, since I started my PhD, and I always kind of, and I've changed a lot in my terminology and things like that, but very early on in my research, I realized that there was a problem of euphemization, of like, we were not kind of like naming it for what it was. We were like tiptoeing around it, because Marine Le Pen or Jean-Marie Le Pen didn't want to be called extreme right, for example. So people started calling them populist. In fact, it's Jean-Marie Le Pen in the 1990s, in the early 1990s, who forces the term into public discourse, which is fascinating from my point of view. He's like, oh, call me a populist instead of extreme right. And all of a sudden it's like everyone calls them populists. And I've been, I've noticed it, and many of my colleagues have noticed it, it's still quite hard in academia to call these parties what they are. Because you will get pushback. It's like, oh, are they really far right? Are they really extreme right? Is it really racism, or is it something else? I was like, no, it is. I mean, if you look at sophisticated, there's something particularly problematic in political science as well, is the refusal to engage with systemic forms of oppression, and racism in particular, where if it's not obvious extreme racism, then it's not racism. If it's slightly coded, then it's something else. And it's nationalism, it's nativism, it's something else. And I think there's been such a problem, because we have caricatured fascism as evil, but calling anything fascism, calling anything racism, meant that it was the last kind of like, it was almost blasphemy, right? We were going too far. We couldn't just throw that randomly. And that completely disarmed us. Yeah, that completely disarmed us, because then that prevented us from actually talking about the very real threat that these politics are, not just to the communities at the sharp end, but to democracy as well, to all of us, right? So an attack on trans rights is an attack on all of our rights. Yes. And unfortunately, we've been completely disarmed by being too scared to call it what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's
well,
a big
and
issue.
like we're having this fight right now about whether we can call the detention centers concentration camps or not.
Yeah, right.
Which
Or a
has been
genocide,
going on forever. Yeah,
Right.
if we can call a genocide a genocide. And it's like we already ahead of time created definitions that I thought we all agreed would hold, right? And the places and the actions that we're referring to fit those definitions like a glove, right? And yet it still is we're cheapening the experience of people who survived concentration camps before, et cetera, et cetera. And this goes back, I found an old NPR piece arguing about whether it was okay to call Japanese internment camps concentration camps. It's like, actually, historians were trying to tell the NPR authors, like, you need to understand that the word internment is a euphemism for concentration camp. Like, you have to understand that. And like using it is actually like euphemizing and minimizing the experiences of the people who survived the Japanese concentration camps in America. And the places where we are sending our migrants now, where they are in unsanitary conditions, they are crowded together, they have been moved there against their will and against due process. That is an example of a concentration camp, straight up. And to tell me I can't say that is a form of extremism.
Absolutely.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that I think is quite key is that, 10, 15 years ago, these people could claim ignorance. They could claim, are you sure? Or I'm not sure. Or I don't know, blah, blah, blah. But now that the masks have fallen on the far right, now that Bovino is dressed like a fascist, now that Trump is doing white supremacy, now that Musk has bought a massive social media platform and is doing horrible things, no one can pretend this is not what it is. And yet, there's still people pushing back. There's still people telling us, are you sure?
But again, this harkens back to the beginning of our discussion, in which we noted how they take advantage of the fact that we have principles, right? And so
we want to get it right. That's the thing.
You cannot imagine the far right having this discussion, right, with like right-wing version of Trent, right-wing version of Caitlin, right-wing version of Aurelien, being like, oh, like, should we really be calling every person who believes in any amount of social welfare a communist? Like that would never be a discussion that's happening, because they don't care. We care. We say, well, is it really fascism? Is it, or are we being hyperbolic? And I think
let's not go too far now. And meanwhile, they're like, Kamala Harris is a straight up Marxist. Like,
right, is a Marxist who only cares about transgender people, does not care about anybody else. Right. And so I think
she's personally going to every prison and giving everybody transgender surgery. We need. Why am I being so pussyfooted then?
We need to grow up. We need to say, you're a fascist and this is fascism, right? And this isn't communism, but we're not going to be like thrown off of course by this sort of mincing of things. You're a fascist, okay? You call yourself a populist, you're a fascist.
Whatever.
Get over that.
Joy.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's only one. That's, I think, one thing that we need to do. The other thing that we need to do as well is very clearly kind of point the finger at the people who have enabled that as well, and who are continuing to enable this, because there is also kind of like power struggles here that are taking place, where for many people who are not necessarily fascist, it's better to have a strong kind of like fascist right than to have a strong left, whatever it is that left. Whether it's kind of like from social democracy to kind of like much more kind of like extreme left. Because the far right is not a threat to the system as such, or doesn't have to be. In fact, that takes us back to the 1930s again, when the Weimar Republic was hoping they could use Hitler as a puppet, right? And Hitler seemed a lot less threatening than the socialists or the communists at the time in Germany. And we're not reliving the same kind of history, obviously, and I think we need to be careful with this kind of historical comparison. But we also need to learn lessons, right, from what has happened before. And what we're seeing right now is that a lot of mainstream elite who are saying they're against the far right are far more comfortable with the far right than they are with the left. We're seeing, for example, people like Emmanuel Macron telling us that, the Rassemblement National is as dangerous as a loose coalition on the left, which is ridiculous, right? We're seeing the same thing in the UK with the Labour Party, the centre-left party, the equivalent of the Democrat, is doing the same thing about the kind of Greens and the kind of far right as well.
Why do you think that is, Aurelien?
Democrats in the US. Why do I think it is? Well, because it's a question of power, and these people know that if the left really got into, if a real left really got into power and decided to really change the system, decided to address the many crises that we're facing, whether it's the climate crisis, the crisis of inequality, the various kind of health crises that are around, the democratic crisis, then these people would stand to lose out a lot.
Exactly.
Right? And so this system is propping itself up. This system is in, I'm not saying they're necessarily doing this consciously. I think there's a lot of kind of like what I call in a paper epistemologies of ignorance, and building on Charles Mills, for example, who's done some amazing work on the racial contract and others as well, talking about the U.S. This idea that people convince themselves that this is the only way forward, and so it's kind of like semi-conscious, but it's almost like invisible to them at some stage. For some of them, it's more conscious than others. But when you look at, for example, I think the Epstein scandals, the Epstein files again, I think are just fascinating about this, because what we're seeing is like, you get people from Clinton to Bill Gates to Trump to Musk to all of that, all in cahoot. And it's like, well, not all in cahoot, of course, we're not all there at the same time, but you can see that there's an ecosystem here. And that these people are closer than they are to the rest of us. They're closer together than they are to the rest of us. And, if we were in power, then things would be different.
And you just said it, right? It's that capitalism reconciles itself better with fascism.
Exactly.
Capitalism looks at socialism and says, part of your core tenet is rearranging us, right? Whereas fascism says part of our core tenet is accentuating what you guys already do, right? So how much better is that of an incentive, right?
Exactly,
for
right.
the person who's selfish,
And you know what? I don't think you have to go to socialism. In fact, capitalism reconciles itself better with fascism than it does with democracy.
Right.
Even without kind of naming what kind of democracy we want. And that's why we're seeing like the rise of technocracy, the rise of autocracy, reactionary tech, all of that stuff, right? The rise of lobbies, the rise of, massive PACs and so on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that idea of like just thinking that you can use the fascists to like get to your desired goal. I was getting really frustrated because, I like to look at this sort of like the woke university kind of thing, that whole discourse, right? And so I've been reading all of these things, especially by Steven Pinker. He loves to put out like an op-ed every month or two about this, where he'll be like, Democrats and all of you academics, you're missing this amazing opportunity to let Trump fix our problems. Like, we can just not go along with all the like overtly fascist parts, but like we had an issue of, woke lefty professors and students ruining everything. And he wants to help us with that. So like, why don't we just take advantage of that like amazing thing and just I'm just so afraid that Trump being such an overt fascist is gonna like scare us away from doing the necessary work in curbing wokeness on our universities. And it's like, bro, he wants you all gone. I don't know what to tell you. Like
But you can see how that works, though, again, and that takes us back to this kind of construction of the evil image. Okay, sure, Trump is going too far, but there's a problem. And it's like, no, there's no problem at all. Just by saying Trump is going too far, you then legitimize the idea that there's actually a problem in the first place, which is ridiculous, right? I always find the way the right and far right talk about universities fascinating, and your take on it is great, and I always like when you talk about it. But it's such a ridiculous kind of point to make that students or academics have power. We have so little power, particularly left-wing academics. I mean, as if academia is such a conservative setting. It's based on hierarchies. It's based on as we see again, with the people named in the Epstein files. It's like, it just blows my mind how the far right has constructed this kind of myth around universities as kind of like radical spaces, which can be, don't get me wrong, but they're not in and of themselves. And we've lapped it up because it makes us feel good about ourselves. And then we do nothing with it. Yeah.
Well, and for people like Steven Pinker, it apparently just was such an attack on his way of life that students and grad students and postgrads didn't want to be considered like viable targets for sex from their professors. Somehow this was like so intolerable that we had to like cozy up to Epstein and fascism and just like allow this huge slide to happen just so that like people would stop saying that.
Yeah, but it's like the meme, right? I always come back to this meme of like this guy shaving his head and getting a swastika tattooed saying, "You made me do this."
That's Matt Boers, right?
Yeah, I can't believe you made me do this. Yeah.
I hate this. I really do, but you've left me no choice.
If only the left wasn't so mean, right? God.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm so sorry. No, and it was me. I made Steven Pinker be that way because I personally bullied him, and I really regret that. Actually, no, I regret
your fault. Nothing. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Polarizing.
I was his first block.
Yeah. Caitlin, you were very polarizing. Exactly.
I was like 2 days before the big wave of blocks. So it did feel a little personal, I'll be honest.
Oh, he didn't like you. Absolutely. So that's good.
That's, yeah, I think that's badge of honor, right?
Yeah. No, it felt good. Okay, so the last thing I want to get back to this like fear of the masses thing because I'm obsessed with it. I love it so much in the way that you love like a leech or like a gross bog that you found. Like I just love it.
Well, villain, a person who's from a villa, right? A villain is a person who comes from a villa, and yet that word, just like mean, has been taken and applied to the average individual.
It's Cruella DeVille, actually.
Right.
Who is a wealthy person. My goodness.
As a pejorative, right? Villains are bad. Mean is yeah, we have a whole bunch of problems with that. And I think it's really baked into how we even talk. Obviously, that's why I brought it up.
Well, I think that, okay, so again, I don't mean to harp on Steven Pinker, right? But he did write a book called Rationality, so he is sort of asking for it. But, you know, he does have a lot of his writing where as you get into it, it starts to sound like basically fine and right. And then you get to some point where you're like, oh, the unavoidable conclusion of this whole thing has been that like, actually aristocracy is kind of great and like that like the elites are the ones who really know how things should go and we should like stop trying to prevent them from just dictating the way that everything should be run and because they got there for a reason, because they're like extremely civilized and rational and intelligent. You're like and this whole idea that like mob rule is bad and dangerous, that once you get people into groups they become irrational and violent, it dovetails so neatly with the fascist ideologies that we also see that like it feels silly that anybody would still be promoting it. And yet here we are, right? And it goes in similarly with this like pathology idea, groups of people will spread germs and they will also spread, radicalism, right?
Right.
And like the woke Twitter mob idea of that like being the same thing, where it's like, I'm so sorry that you got some comments that you didn't enjoy reading. Like, that is kind of the reality of being on social media, unfortunately. But I don't know why we decided to enable a fascist takeover about it.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely correct. And I think, this is one of the things that always kind of brings it back to kind of populism and what I've called populist hype with colleagues as well. The way populism that has been applied to the far right, completely mistakenly from my point of view, because actually, the far right is not for the people. It speaks for the people, but it's not by the people. It's never, fascism. Of course, Hitler, Mussolini, they claimed that they were doing things for the Italian people, for the German people, and so on. But this was never by the people,
Right.
While a left-wing form of populism or the people, you don't even have to call it populism, but like gathering the people, gathering, left-wing masses and all of these kind of things has always been core to any progress we've had, right? So I think there's been some really interesting developments in academia on anti-populism as well. There's lots of kind of colleagues who have done some great work. And I'm thinking in particular of one of my colleagues here at Bath, Alex Yates, who's doing his PhD right now, his doctoral studies on this and kind of developing kind of theories to kind of understand not just the way populism works, whether on the left or right, but also the way anti-populism works, which is the way populism plays a kind of similar role to polarization. It prevents us from actually looking at alternatives to the status quo, because we are told that as soon as you try to shake the status quo a little bit, to change things, to propose a radical rearrangement of the way our society is organized economically, politically, and so on, you become a populist. And if you're a populist, well, you're just like Trump, right?
Yeah.
And if you're just like Trump, well, you're just like Hitler, pretty much, right, these days. So it's like, there's this kind of like, conflation. So it's like, Bernie Sanders is just as bad as Trump. It's ridiculous, right? Bernie Sanders is a moderate social democrat. He's not even like left by many definitions, at least in Europe, right? And yet they conflate it. And this also then completely, the term populism used this way completely delegitimizes the people. The people becomes delegitimized as naive, as childish, as following demagogues, as following liars, people pronouncing them, a lot of rubbish. Of course, when we talk about populism, we tend to talk about the working class as well, which of course becomes completely caricatural, which is not really about the working class. It's about people who come from a certain background, which completely ignores the racialized working class, which is far more numerous, that is far more precarious, and so on and so forth. And so all of this, at the end of the day, really goes against democracy. And yet it's seen as sensible, kind of like serious, grown up.
Right. Well, and as soon as any kind of progressive politician is at all charming, all the alarms start to go off where people are like, oh no, a populist. Oh, he's going to get the masses to rise up. He's going to whip them into a frenzy. They're going to be just like a crazy mob. They're going to have their pitchforks and their torches. And it's like, okay, Mamdani has dimples. I'm sorry. Oops.
I don't think New York exists anymore anyway since it's been elected, right? It's disappeared.
It exploded. That's right.
Yeah, it exploded.
My friend texted
me. No more
billionaires. I asked him. I said, "How's New York City going?" He goes, "It's fine. We have to pray 5 times a day, but otherwise, it's all good."
Right. It's kind of a time suck. I had to buy a mat. I don't know. Well, living as I am in the smoking husk of Portland, Oregon, I sympathize. I didn't realize that Minneapolis was also a smoking husk, though. I'm really glad that I had Representative Scalise to let me know about that. I thought that my friend was living in a house on a city block, but it turns out she's living in a crater. Well, did we do it? Have we covered all our... I get so excited. I have to do more yelling all the time.
I mean, there's always more stuff I could yell about. Aurelien, you're absolutely brilliant, and thank you so much for yelling with us and for teaching us some stuff.
No, my pleasure. I mean, I could yell forever. So, whenever you need me, I'll be back.
Awesome. Okay, well, you'll probably find me bothering you again in not too long of a time.
That sounds good. No, thank you so much for having me on. It was, really enjoyed the conversation. So,
Thank you so much. The article is a critique of the polarization narrative, expanding the limits of democracy, parties, and political participation. This has been Half the Answer, where understanding a question is half the answer. And officially, the happy days are back. So you're welcome, America. And we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Half the Answer, presented by Liberal Currents. You can find Half the Answer anywhere you get your podcasts. Liberal Currents is an entirely listener and subscriber-funded publication, which includes programs like Half the Answer and Neon Liberalism. So, if you like what you've heard and wish to contribute, you may do so at liberalcurrents.com and through Patreon. And remember, understanding a question is half the answer.